and a stone. Does everyone have one? Okay. Now, during the course of the sermon and before we come up to do our communion and make our offering, what I would like for you to do is on the back of your forgiven card, I would like for you to write one word that represents to you somehow, personally, in a way that only you understand, someone in your life or a situation in your life that either you need to forgive or you need forgiveness for. Now, the stone represents the weight of this thing that you've been carrying around. And so when we do our communion and we come over to our offering basket, we're going to put the stone and the card in the basket, knowing that we have been forgiven and the weight of that burden has been lifted from us. Everybody got that? Okay. So, this week we are continuing our series on the Lord's Prayer, and today we come to the section of the prayer that is dangerous. That's right, you heard me. It's dangerous. This next petition is so dangerous, in fact, that St. Augustine himself referred to it as the terrible petition, and that is the line that asks God to forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Well, the first half of the petition, forgive us our debts, is not so terrible, but when you hang that second part on it, as we forgive our debtors, it turns into an instant minefield where we have to be careful where we step, because if we've not actually forgiven our debtors, then in essence what we're asking God is not to forgive us. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Every single week, at least once a week, we repeat these words, which is the same thing as saying, forgive me, God, to the same extent that I have forgiven those who have wronged me. Yikes. Over and over, we have said these words. Hundreds, no, actually thousands of times, snuggling with them like a baby blanket. It makes us feel safe and secure. But how often have we seriously weighed the implications of this request before making it? How many of us pause and do a little inventory first, asking ourselves, now, have I actually forgiven everyone who needs to be forgiven? Or are there some grudges that I haven't let go of yet? Okay, so before you start looking for the nearest exit, let me be the first to admit that I seldom take the time to think it through. And St. Augustine must have struggled with it too, otherwise he would not have named it the terrible petition. Now, there are some folks who think that maybe we, meaning the church, shouldn't say the Lord's Prayer every week because repetition leads to familiarity, and familiarity leads to a tendency to go through the motions without really thinking about what we're doing or what we're saying. But you know what? I thought about that, and I realized that is a terrible idea. That is running away. That is quitting. It's giving up. And that's not what we're here for. We're here to be challenged by these things. We're here for enlightenment and increased awareness so that we can see ourselves in our potential through God's eyes. We're here to learn that, yes, we do make these mistakes, but we don't have to keep making them. We're here to grow and to stretch ourselves. So if you're asking yourselves, well, gosh, how many times have I asked God not to forgive me? Take heart, because now we have the opportunity to open our eyes just a little bit more. And that's the first step, recognition, which leads to a growing awareness. But there are still a whole lot of hurdles to clear, because let's face it, offering forgiveness to those who have wronged us might sound easy enough, but actually doing it, and doing it sincerely, is one of the biggest challenges that we face in life. If it were easy, it wouldn't be a problem, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But we humans are a pretty fickle bunch when it comes to forgiveness. Sometimes we can manage it easily enough when we're feeling particularly generous. But more often than not, we have this strange tendency to hold on to our grudges, to nurse them, and to even seek revenge. And I'm not talking so much about the big things, the big wrongs that in some ways are easier to reckon with because they're big, they're noticeable, they gnaw at us, and we have to deal with them, or they end up eating us alive. What I'm talking about is the little stuff. The stuff going on just beneath the surface that you can barely see. The daily stuff that is so small we can almost pretend as if it's not even there. For instance, have you ever had someone say something to you that just completely throws you off balance? Something small, something that only you are aware of, and maybe the person who said it didn't even realize what they were saying, but nevertheless, you end up feeling diminished. It happens, right? People say things, sometimes intentionally, other times not, but try as we might, we just can't seem to let go of that remark and get it out of our heads. And before we know it, despite our best intentions, there we are, saying something snarky, trying to even the score. And then come the feelings of shame, because once again, we gave in to our dark side, but it was such a small thing, surely no one noticed besides the person that we zinged, even if they noticed. So let's pretend that it never even happened. Does that sound familiar? I sure hope so, because I would hate to be the only person to have ever done something like that. It's hard to own. It's hard to admit. So we bury these minor infractions and try to forget about them. But then we come here and pray, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, and the hole that we've dug for ourselves gets even deeper. It stinks. And I don't know why, but it's just how we are. It's part of our genetic predisposition. Whether we like it or not, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, a big chunk of our human experience involves enduring harm inflicted on us by other people and doling out our own fair share of harm. And you know what? Sometimes I'm not sure which is the bigger pill to swallow. The fact that I will be harmed, or the fact that I will do some harm of my own. Whether it's big harm, such as child abuse, alcoholism, or domestic violence, or the little stuff that we can almost pretend didn't happen. Whether we're dishing it out or receiving it. The bottom line is that our relationships are not whole, and the wounds we cause are not just superficial. The damage human beings inflict on each other runs deep and can lead to some pretty horrible consequences. This is what it means to be a sinner. This is what it means to be human. And if I had to guess, I'd say that's why Jesus added this caveat to the petition for forgiveness in the first place. Sure, God can forgive us our debts, but if we're not equally willing to forgive our debtors, if we're not willing to do the work that it takes to restore our relationships back to wholeness, then God's forgiveness doesn't really mean much, does it? It would be like a giant permission slip to extract revenge on each other, knowing that regardless of how much harm we cause, God will forgive us. What kind of a world would that be? Well, fortunately, that's not how it works. The gospel demands more from us. The gospel demands that we are called to participate with God in bringing about the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And you know, that is pretty heady stuff when you think about it. Us helping to bring about God's kingdom. For all of our human flaws and all of our imperfections, God chose us to co-partner with in bringing about God's kingdom here in earth as it is in heaven. God created us. God knows how utterly flawed and messed up we can be, but God chose us, and when I meditate on the implications of that, I'm filled with awe. God chose us, and God has forgiven us for our thick-headedness time and time again. From where we stand, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Might be a terrible petition if we haven't offered any forgiveness lately, but that doesn't mean that God is up there balancing a scale and offering forgiveness in equal measure to ours. That's not how God operates. That's how humans work. God forgives us. When we ask God to forgive us, God forgives us. And it is God's forgiveness that we need to mimic, because God's forgiveness is complete, whereas ours claims reservations. People who are forgiven, people who experience God's holy forgiveness, are the people most apt to seek ways of offering forgiveness. So yeah, praying, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, might be dangerous, but for that very reason, it might also be the most brave and sincere thing that we can pray when we are consciously aware that we have an equal role to play in that petition. The German theologian Dietrich wrote, "The service of forgiveness is rendered by one to the others daily. It occurs without words in the intercessions for one another. And every member of the fellowship who does not grow weary in this ministry can depend upon it that this service is also being rendered to him by the brethren. He who is bearing others knows that he himself is being borne, and only in this strength can he go on bearing." Now those words are a little archaic, but Bonhoeffer's vision of community offers forgiveness like bread on a daily basis by each member to each member, making us stronger together and holding us to standards of accountability. Forgiveness, even just the possibility of forgiveness, is the real glue that binds our life together. And it is through mutual grace that we learn how to bear one another in all senses. We belong to each other. We belong to God. And we are called by God to participate in bringing about the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So let's make a community agreement, okay? Let's agree that each week before we come together to say the Lord's Prayer, we will take a moment to do a little personal inventory. We could do this in our silent prayer, right before the pastoral prayer, or at any time in the service, really. But let's make a pact together that we will set things right in our hearts before we come to God in prayer. And today, to get us started, let's be sure to write that one word on our forgiven slip and put it in the basket along with our stone. Will you please pray with me? God, we praise you that your grace and mercy and forgiveness toward us is our one true source of our forgiveness toward others. Forgiven people forgive people. And God, we thank you for guiding the way toward this kind of freedom. You who perfected enemy love have given us your own heart. May we more and more become what we receive. Amen.